Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this session at the York Festival of Ideas. My name is Professor Leo McCann from the University of York Management School. I'm delighted to introduce this session and host this session today. And I'm joined by two very special speakers to talk about their new work on this whole subject of rapport. So I'll say a few words about my guests. So the first is Professor Laurence Alison, who's a professor of psychology at the University of Liverpool, and he's an expert in critical incidents. And he's also awarded an MBE in last year's New Year's Honours List. Also joining us is Emily Alison, who's a behavioural psychologist and an expert in intervention development. She's interested in the treatment of violence, of particularly domestic abuse and domestic violence perpetrators. She's worked with children and young people in a whole range of interventions dealing with serious problems to do with violence and disorder. So we have an hour in this event together. The Q&A box is open for you to raise any questions you might have, and I'll handle those questions and raise them and put them towards the audience. Laurence and Emily will be talking about their new book, Rapport, the 4 ways to handle people. It's got not 4 ways to handle people, but the subject, excuse me, I've got that slightly wrong.
To read people.
There we go, the 4 ways to read people. Yeah,
we can handle people as well, but yeah, we can just
much more sensitive approach to read people, excuse me. Yeah. So they'll be talking about the new book, which is based on many years of research and there's a whole range of interesting insights to take from this piece of work. I've got a few. If you'd like to purchase a copy of the book of Rapport, it'll be available from our partner bookseller Fox Lane Books. And for more information on book sales, please head to our website or to foxlanebooks.co.uk/Festival of Ideas. Before we get into the talk, a few technical notes. If you're watching live, of course, I mentioned the Q&A function is available on your screen. That will remain open throughout the talk, so please leave a question in there, and I'll get to as many of these as I can. Should you have any technical issues, such as loss of Wi-Fi, loss of internet, you can rejoin the event using the original link. Please remember today's event is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch again. Subtitles are available. To turn these on or off, use the CC Live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. Okay, so without any further ado, welcome Laurence, welcome Emily. It's great to have you here this morning. I hope you're both doing well. How are things?
Great, yeah, lovely to be with you. We're next to a bunch of cows who are getting very excited, so there's a lot of mooing in the background. Yes, apologies.
It's feeling very festive.
Try and keep the cats and the cows away, but yeah, we're all good. How are you?
I'm very well too, thank you. Yeah, this is all part of the new world we're living in, right?
Yeah.
Make the best of it.
Look, I think the thing is to say to the audience, we'd love to see you in 3 dimensions, but we've all been in a 2-dimensional world for a long time. But let's hope and pray we're coming out the other side. I think and hope we are. So, but yeah, it's great to be with you. Thanks for asking us, and please do use that chat facility. Please ask any questions you like. We're open to anything. Yeah, I mean, give us a hard time. Be critical. Reach out. Give us some tough questions. I know Leo will. So yeah, let's go for it. We're good. We're ready.
Thanks so much. So I'll open then with just a very, very general question. I mentioned your brief bios and your backgrounds. We'll get to that in a moment, but if we can just start with a very quick introduction to what the Rapport book is about. What was the background to writing it? Who is the intended audience? What are you trying to do with the book, and what do you think you've achieved with it?
Well, I think what really prompted us to write Rapport, which is our first sort of non-academic piece together, certainly, and that was quite a journey for us as well, but was in our professional lives, we were training mainly police officers in the use of the strategies that are in Rapport to use in police suspect interviewing. And the feedback that we kept getting, and what we know as psychologists, was that the principles we were teaching are universally helpful for communicating. And I mean, we used to sort of joke that, like, if you can speak to and handle a conversation with a teenager, you can handle a conversation with a terrorist. It's the same sort of skill set that you're drawing on to manage communication sometimes. And we were getting feedback from a lot of our participants on the training to say, this is really helpful in my job, but it's not only that, it's also helpful, in my family life, in dealing with my kids, in trying to work things out with my partner. Just there's all sorts of scenarios and situations. And I think that really prompted us to try to bring that learning together in a way that was clear and digestible and usable for people across all those sorts of situations.
I think it was telling when Ems had a Navy SEAL that was the size of a house in the car park after the training, sort of tearfully saying, not only have you made me a better interrogator, you've made me a better father. And we, so sort of comments that we get a lot. And that in and of itself tells you a lot about the system that we're using. That, we've always said, I mean, in the US, the read technique's been very popular for a number of years, and it's a very manipulative, persuasive, I would say pernicious sort of approach to being confession driven. And, one of the things we want to get in there quickly to the audience is this is not about manipulating people or doing something underhand or deceptive. It's very straightforward and honest. And, the litmus test for our technique is, daughter was being interviewed. Would I be happy with them being interviewed, whether they were guilty or not, with the techniques that we are using? And my answer to that is yes. And any academic that is going to propose a technique for police officers to use, the litmus test for you should be, would you be happy with this technique being used by police officers on your son, your mother, your daughter? And so the fact that we were getting a lot of cops and military personnel saying, this is really helping me not only get a result in the interrogation booth, but actually I'm getting a better relationship with my wife, my dad, my daughter, my son. Do you know what I mean? And that's the true test of its efficacy and, a more compassionate approach.
Sure, that's very interesting. Let's rewind this a little bit back to your backgrounds and how we got to this. I mean, the area you're working in is someone might regard as it's challenging, it's controversial, it's potentially often in my line of work, this is often described as kind of an extreme setting, right? Something that involves possibly traumatic events, extremely difficult characters, upsetting and stressful environments, right? And it's kind of a growing area of interest, and it's something that I've got lots of connections to. But going back into your own backgrounds, I mean, we're talking about a time where both of you, and it says in the book, in the early parts of the book, which were fascinating, about some of the various investigations that you've been involved in and the concerns you had about how some of these were being conceptualized and run, and then the philosophy and the theory and practice being involved in these various investigations were troubling to you, right? So could you say a little bit more about that? This early part of the book was what I found really, really interesting. So it might provide useful background to our audience today.
Yeah, I mean, our work started in the wake of the Obama inauguration and his commitment to doing interviewing and intelligence gathering that was legally, appropriately, morally acceptable and had an evidence base. And so the High Value Detainee Interrogation Group was formed, or the HIG, which was comprised of CIA, DOD and FBI. And there was a large grant that was awarded to the HIG, and we got a very small, not that I'm emphasizing the very small chunk that we got. No, don't want to get my soapbox there. But we got a grant, some grant funding to do some field-based research. And what I'm particularly proud of is that we got access to real data with real people, real terrorists, real people in difficult situations and real interrogators. And that's where we started. But you're right, Leo, it's an intense, extreme and, life-threatening sort of event that you're involved in, as you know, with your own work as well. It can be very traumatic and upsetting and distressing. We've both walked in that sort of area for some time now, but we just felt it was important to look at the real data, not lab-based experiments or stuff like that. But Emma, do you want to?
Well, and I think also critical to what we were doing was that it couldn't, for us as psychologists, the checkered history of psychologists' involvement in interrogation, in intelligence gathering, in psychological manipulation of people is quite horrific. And so the ethics of that are deeply disturbing. And in particular, the involvement of psychologists, named as sort of the architects of the enhanced interrogation program, which involved, things like putting people in closed spaces with, live insects, and just thinking, where is the science that says that's how you get information out of people? We know that that will have an effect, but will it get you credible intelligence and evidence? And so for us, it was a bit difficult as psychologists to watch your profession be associated with that journey when our fundamental principle is meant to be helping people.
Sure.
But I do want to highlight, we also knew we couldn't come in as a kind of morality police and say, this isn't how you treat people.
Don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other. Well, if you're a cop, okay, well, what do I do then?
And especially, especially if they could say, well, but this works. And, obviously we know that it doesn't work, but you can't just say, don't do that because it doesn't work. You have to actually say, don't do that, do this. This will not only not be immoral, unethical, but it will also be effective. And that was really important for us, that the techniques we were finding, what is actually going to get you the information that you need that's credible, genuine, not fabricated or falsified. So that was...
It's easy to tell people what not to do, especially when you're not the doer that has to do it. But it's not good enough in my mind to just wash your hands of it and say, well, we're psychologists and we're the morality police, particularly when actually it's largely psychologists that, it's a stain on our profession, what a lot of them have done and have repeatedly done. You go all the way back to the 16th century where witch trials were doing exactly the same thing, dunking witches in the water, which is more or less not that far from what, the enhanced interrogation tactics were doing, and supported, importantly, by people that were accredited psychologists. And yet we don't even teach our undergraduates that. No. Well, I do. That is a lesson they're not going to forget. And they need. And at the end of the day, if you are a psychologist, you have the power to help. If you have the power to help, you know what wounds people as well. And that's what disturbed us. That a lot of the techniques that emerged from how you deal with depression and helplessness were being re-engineered to exact that. And I could only really see it as a kind of revenge or desperate strategy because they weren't getting anywhere with being unprofessional. And that was the problem. It's not good enough to say, oh, yeah, well, they screwed it up, so don't do that anymore. You've got to get in there and try and help because these guys have got a difficult job, right?
Sure. These are fascinating insights. There's a long history. Going back to 16th century is very interesting, but I was thinking going back slightly more recent period of time, 60s and 70s.
Yeah,
the kind of long backwash of problems involved in unsanctioned operations, CIA, other agencies, National Security Agency, and other countries outside of US.
Well, and there's a fantastic book by Ian Cobain called "Cruel Britannia," which is he's a Guardian journalist as well, actually, and we often get it that the Brits are sort of saying, well, we wouldn't engage in that. Well, look at the 1970s, what we were doing to people accused of being involved in the IRA. We were exactly doing that. And actually, a lot of the principles that were used by the enhanced interrogation, should really call it torture, brigade, were being engineered from those 1970s issues that were authorised by the British government on detainees. So we are as guilty of it as anyone.
Sure. Many states, many governments, agencies around the world have been involved in all kinds of humanitarian abuses. To come to this particular case, I've read some other pieces of work around it. It's a fascinating book called Fear Up Harsh, about Tony Lagoranis, who was an army intelligence officer working in whether it was Iraq or Afghanistan, I don't remember, but it was that era, that Bush era, around when all of these scandals erupted. What struck me reading that book was not only the harshness and inappropriateness of it, but just a lack of basic professionalism. It was amateurish. And it was done in a rush. We need to find intelligence. Go out there, arrest and detain hundreds, thousands of people, bring them into these detention centers, extract information from them. And what struck me so strongly in Laurens's book is, even aside from the actual morality of what they're doing and how some of the techniques were completely inappropriate and damaging and traumatizing, they're also taking, putting people through the system who were completely innocent and were drawn in just to basically tick a box to say, I've hit my performance targets, right? I've brought in this many suspects. I've put this many people. I've made this many after action reports. I've filled in this many wads of data complete with complete interrogations, box checked, right? And no progress, right? No overall. What are we doing here? This is supposedly about intelligence gathering, security services, and what have they achieved? So little, right? Yeah. Partly because of this kind of bullying environment that they're all in, right? The demands placed on them to extract data, right?
And I think it's an understandable journey. I mean, again, sort of pushing up, loads of other books. Unjustified Means by Mark Fallon's an excellent account of his journey in whistleblowing against it. So there are people that have stood up against it, despite that systemic sort of abuse of people. And, I think the other thing is perhaps it's worth trying to understand the drive towards that, because it's when things get desperate, when fear happens and when nothing else seems to work. And after all, to some extent, the role of a soldier requires that you dehumanize the enemy to do what you need to be able to do. And that might be right for that process of soldiering. But if you've just seen your mate have a bilateral amputation because they've stood on an IED, and then you're expected to humanize the person that you think might have had something to do with it, that's too big an ask of your military professionals. So you've got to get real about the complexity of what it is that you're dealing with. And as you say, Leo, you don't want to leave it in the hands of people too late. There's got to be a system in place that deals with these complex issues.
But I also, I want to highlight that part of this is there's individual failures where you allow your emotions to overtake your goal, and actually the goal becomes about your desire for revenge or desire for control or whatever it is, and you forget the goal is the information, the intelligence. But then there's also systems that were put in place to indoctrinate people to use a framework based on fear, control, dominance, and oppression. And that for me is the real problem when you look at, how does this translate? Because obviously we're talking about a very specific context, but, obviously with Rapport, what we're thinking as well is how does this translate to other circumstances, other contexts like business environments or households, and it's when you base your framework of communication on fear, dominance, and control, it's corrupting. You lose sight of what is my actual goal here around whether it's productivity, whether it's contentment, whether it's, happiness, whatever that goal is, you lose sight of that and think that it's about maintaining the system rather than the actual goal.
That's a great point to make, and it's important to broaden out the talk in terms of discuss the background in some depth. It might be quite interesting to move on to look at some of these ideas in more depth. So the whole book is premised around the idea that a lot of us are quite poor at communicating and developing the kind of interaction with another person that helps both people to achieve the goals that they've set for themselves, right? And you talk in the book about the here principles quite early on. Would you be able to talk me and the audience through that? What are the here principles and why do they play such an important role in your analysis?
Do you want me to do that one? There's two components to the model, and one of them is the here principles, as you say, Leo, and those we drew from a lot of therapeutic practices that are about creating an atmosphere that supports communication, that supports openness. And so if your goal is to have that communication, to have that dialogue, then the here principles help you do that. And they are to, first off, be honest. And that's really hard. I have to say, across so many domains, what I encounter is avoidance. So people broadly speaking, not everyone, we probably all know somebody who likes conflict, but broadly speaking, people don't like conflict at all. And in fact, they'll try to avoid it. And that leads to sort of passive aggressive behavior, trying to do things behind the scenes, or even sort of dishonest behavior. One of the examples we give is like what you see happen in cases of bullying or harassment in a workplace. And what will happen is, not in all cases, but often the organization will take the account from the person who's alleged the bullying and harassment, and they'll just move people apart to avoid the problem. So if we just change your department or we move you to a new team, then hopefully it'll just go away. And it's that kind of idea that we're not very good at honest conversations, at giving people the bottom line. Either we sort of hedge around it and are woolly or vague, or we give people honesty, like I often call it the trout to the face honesty version, which we're too blunt, we're too direct. So it's getting that balance of, can I give you this statement objectively without bringing my emotions into it, and be clear about what we're discussing, what's the situation that we need to address here. And that kind of goes for partner, teenager, work colleagues, whatever it is, that those are important principles. The second one is empathy. I have to speed these up. The second one is empathy, which is, that should help you with that honesty, which is understanding the other person's point of view. And that's often really challenging for us to genuinely put ourselves in someone else's head. So we're not looking for, well, if that had happened to me, what would I do? We're looking for, if you were them. So if you were 17, surviving a pandemic, and this is what was happening to you, can you understand? Can you empathize with that person's situation? And that requires a kind of mindset that we call objective curiosity, which is, I want to understand what's going on for you. I don't have to agree with it. I don't need to collude with it or feel sympathetic. I just need to want to understand it.
And even if you don't understand, it's the effort that is required to do it. I mean, the example that we often give in training is, we had a young woman who was blogging some dangerous material. And what was she, 19? 19-year-old, being interviewed by two rugby playing British white males in their 30s. When we looked at this video on the screen, it's just a wall of masculinity, right? But they were so sensitively trying to put themselves in her shoes, not what I would be like as a 35-year-old rugby playing male. No, what would it be like if I had been a female of her age with her upbringing? Now, no 35-year-old white rugby playing male is going to get there, but it's the effort required. And empathy is often misunderstood as a touchy-feely, warm thing. No, proper clinical empathy requires objectivity, curiosity, and I think the main thing, imagination. There's an act of imagination that is required and that is effortful, to not imagine what it would be like for me as a male, but trying to understand what it would be like for that other person. And big changes in society have happened as acts of imagination. I mean, if you look at the attitude to the poor prior Charles Dickens' work, it was pretty shameful. And there's an argument that Dickens opened up that because people engage with an active imagination through narrative. So as I say, the emotion of it doesn't require a sort of warmth or I don't know, touchy-feely, huggy element to it. It's effortful, very effortful.
No, and people find it, it's become so divisive. Our society and social media has a lot to answer for with that, but pushing people to the extremes where you can't see the other person's side. It's so far away from your own, you struggle. And that makes communication incredibly difficult. So sometimes this is the journey to understanding your enemy in a better way to communicate and bring your side out. So yeah, I think if I was going to give people who are listening a kind of advice about, well, how do you use these first two principles? We often say, put yourself in that person's mindset as much as you can. give 3 statements, don't do less, because otherwise it's cursory. If you just say, yeah, I know that must be really hard, but so give 3 statements of genuine empathy, and then give your bottom line. What's the honest message that you need to give? So I think we give an example in the book about speaking to your elderly parent about having to give up their driver's license. So there you would give those 3 statements of empathy, and then the bottom line of what needs to happen. And the point of this is, it doesn't mean that person's going to just immediately acquiesce and say, oh, yes, of course, I'm totally fine with that. But it keeps rapport. It keeps that thread between you and the other person. It doesn't sever the communication relationship. And that's what we're looking for. The second 2 are autonomy and reflection. Right. Autonomy is a great one in that it's about promoting the other person's sense of self-determination, of choice. None of us like to be controlled. And boy, haven't we discovered that over the last year and a half or so. But as our freedoms become restricted, it naturally creates reactance. We want to rebel against it. So anytime you're trying to control someone, they will be quite likely to react against that. Even if they weren't thinking about rebelling, as soon as you try and control them, then they are.
You can create enemies very quickly that you didn't previously have when you turn the control button up.
Yeah.
People that weren't going to do something bad will start thinking about it if you say not to do it. That's what we call reactance.
You can think about this in examples of the lockdown restrictions and how people have responded. So people who would normally naturally be compliant, be rational, be reasonable. And then when they encounter a restriction that they find unreasonable or unjustified or overzealous, it creates reactance. And so your compliant person now becomes non-compliant, which is exactly what you don't want. So we always say, try to give choice wherever you can. Don't pretend something's a choice when it isn't. This isn't saying, well, I've said you can do what you want and the consequences are on your head. It's try to give that genuine choice. And then the last one for me is that magic bullet of rapport, really, which is reflection. And if there's one thing you would take away from the whole book, I would say master reflection as your art of conversation. And that requires that you listen very carefully to what the other person is saying to you. So again,
without any judgment, without any assumption, without any assumption about where they're going or what they're saying or what they mean. Complete objectivity.
Yeah. And then select those pieces that you want to know more about, that are in line with your goals, that are of interest, and repeat those back. And I know that sounds really ridiculous, like, well, why don't we just get Alexa to do that? But there is a tactical nature of it in thinking, what is the critical element that you've just said? For me, as a behavioral psychologist, I'm always on the lookout for core values. What about what you've said tells me what you care about? Soon as I figure out what you care about, then we can start to find a road towards this goal, whatever it is. Whether you're trying to help someone stop drinking, whether you're trying to, help someone change their violent behavior, whether you're trying to obtain information from them. First, I need to understand what is it you actually fundamentally care about.
And in the book, I mean, I think the easiest thing for people to take away as a tactic, if you like, or a thing that they can do, is if they look at the chapter on reflection, where we go through the various different types, and they go from quite simple reflections, which is literally verbatim repeating back certain words, right the way through to more complex reflections. But that is a thing that I think with practice people can master, and that is the thing that will unlock your ability to do a lot of the other stuff as well. So the reflection bit of it is key. In fact, I was with a coaching session the other day. These are coaches that coach other people. We did a short role play on it, and that penny can drop quite quickly. The others, honesty, empathy, and autonomy, that's about you understanding what they mean, and your route to achieving success with that might be your own groove. But with reflection, it very definitely is a skill you have to learn. Yeah. But it's learnable and it is doable. It feels like it's really hard at first, but when the penny drops, you've got it, and you've got it for life. So that's, as Em says, that is the key that unlocks a lot of these other attributes well.
Okay. These are wonderful, Emily and Laurence. Thank you so much. I've got a few questions from the audience, which I'll start to sift through. Some are quite similar. Some have taken us in various directions. But one theme that's coming out is, could you provide a specific example of maybe a very challenging discussion with someone, someone's behaviour needs to change for whatever reason, and how could you select an example from your book or from your experience about drawing on these principles of honesty, empathy, autonomy, and reflection, and how you managed to successfully do that? I think that people are wanting a coherent example that they can reflect on. So could you provide one of those for us, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
We've got to veer away from specifics around suspect interviews for obvious reasons. But what I would say is we've had several successful examples of people that weren't talking at all. So, you'll have seen on a lot of these programs, people going no comment. Well, we've had several examples of, changing that no comment to a full and frank discussion. I wouldn't say easily, but it does work. It doesn't always work, but it does work. But concrete examples that we can talk about.
I can definitely give you one from sort of parenting. So I had a mum just at a lecture just recently where she said, right, here's a scenario for you. It's been really difficult for kids at the moment. And one of the things that my lad finds comfort in is going online with his friends on his Xbox. And I know that's important to him. However, now that he's going back to school and needing, a bit more sleep than before, he needs to get off this Xbox when I say. And what happens is I say, get off. And then he says, just 10 more minutes. And then I say, fine, this is your 10-minute warning. And then it's 10 minutes. And then he's still on. And he says, I'm in the middle of a game. And I say, why did you start another game? And then I end up just switching it off at the mains. And then it's tears. And then it's another hour before anyone will go to bed. And so I said, okay, well, let's think about what is your goal for this interaction? And she said, I want him to get off the Xbox and go to bed when he's supposed to go to bed. I said, okay, so if you do that in the moment that he's on it in the middle of a game, is that likely to happen? No, we're just going to have a row. So I said, in the moment, you need to say to him, finish this game and swear to me when you finish, then you will stop. And then we need to have a conversation tomorrow morning about this. Over toast and tea. We're having a chat. And then use the HERE principles for setting up your chat. So give empathy. This lad, this 11-year-old lad who's been through, cut off from his friends, cut off from school, in and out of self-isolating, getting sent home from his bubble. What's life like for him? How much does communication with his mates on Xbox mean? So give him some of that empathy.
Someone said to me the other day, the pandemic for kids is a fun sponge. Which, it's tough for kids. And there's been very little acknowledgement of that.
Sure. Yeah. There'll be one or two other questions about the pandemic, and we'll circle back to that in a moment. But just to follow up on that in terms of that's a great example of that is useful for parenting. Another thing might be, say, in the workplace, right? You
want to finish that one off first, though?
Oh, sorry. Just very quickly. I know I'm going on to.
So the very quick solution, the learning here is, one, establish what your goal is. Yeah. That's the first thing.
First thing.
Do you need to deal with this now, or would it be better to pick your moment? That's point one.
Yeah. Then once you have, lead with empathy, then give honesty. So you might say, I know how important this is to you. I know how games are designed that make it hard for you to stop. That's how they're actually built. And I know that you don't want an argument with me and I don't want an argument with you. The bottom line is, I need you to come off of that machine at this time. Then give some autonomy, which is to say, what process can we put in place that'll help you do that? Because I have one which isn't working, which is that basically I give you 10-minute warning, then I shout, then I switch it off. None of us like that solution. So what solution will you have to that issue? And then
give
listen.
Lots of space.
Yeah, let them talk. And then reflect what you hear. And that's how you would apply the HERE principles. But guess what? You have to stay focused, on target, calm, objective. You can't get drawn into being emotional yourself and saying, well, the pandemic's been hard for me as well.
And when you are in the active listening stage, if they give a ridiculous proposal, don't immediately leap all over it. Listen to it and think about it. Because the other thing is, sometimes our kids do educate us. And as parents, we do screw up, and it is important to acknowledge that, and we make this mistake, well, mainly me actually, with our lad, where I think, well, I'm not doing that. It's an absurd idea. But actually, when I've sat and thought about it, I thought, actually, not that absurd. Maybe he's right. Do you know what I mean? So it is it's hard to do that, because you think, well, I'm the parent, what do they know? And this is a ridiculous idea. But it's not impossible for your kids to have a good idea. And if it is their idea and you're going to edge towards it, then don't judge it. Lots of space, sitting back and listening and being prepared to negotiate rather than enforce.
Another thing, this is really helpful. Thanks so much. Another thing that's coming through is questions, maybe skeptical kind of questions, right? Whereby many people would take on board exactly what you're saying, like the need for empathy, for autonomy, for listening, for going about your business in a calm and reasoned and respectful way, respecting the other person that you're interacting with. But what about when you've got a completely difficult scenario, particularly in a workplace? Many workplaces, sadly, are full of bullying, authoritarianism, kind of cliques and ostracism. Somebody mentioned the word gaslighting, which is very, very interesting in the questions, and where you're basically being lied to and manipulated by the organization or by authoritarian bullying type people in the organization is extremely common. This gaslighting also goes on in intimate partner relationships, right? Famously, it's where the whole concept comes from, of course, right? And so when you're dealing with really hostile, unpleasant relationships that just aren't working, when you're being pushed around, belittled, talked down to, exploited in various ways, when you've got so little power, right? I mean, you guys are highly experienced, important people with a whole range of tactics and abilities from your own research and your teaching, etc. You're respected people. What if you're very much an underpowered person, trying to get your opinion across or get make your case made with someone who's maybe an unequal power relation at work?
I mean, that is a very challenging scenario. But I have to say, Leo, I mean, our experiences, the journey to this position in life has definitely included those experiences. So I think it's, it's not uncommon for people to be in a situation where someone else has power over them and that person doesn't respect these principles. They don't communicate like that. They are totalitarian, they're a tyrant, they're a bully. And what can you do with that? I mean, essentially,
we've both had our fair share of horrendous people where we're in a completely asymmetric power situation. And don't forget that, it's not uncommon for us to be in a position where we're dealing with massively skeptical police officers,
right?
Who, you'll get cops that are sat there like this. Oh yeah.
This won't work.
Yeah,
literal, soft.
Yeah. So we've been accused of that many times. Snowflakes and woke brigade, blah blah blah. What's all this BS about being blah blah blah? So I get that. I get that argument, and it's good to be skeptical. But sorry, Ems, I interrupted you.
Well, no, I think for me, the place I would start when someone is speaking to you in a way that is not acceptable, non-productive, bullying, intimidating, go back to those fundamentals of reflection, because often if you just repeat someone's words back to them that they've said to you and they have to hear them, so are you saying to me this? What exactly are you saying to me? So don't you try and appease them or, do whatever they're asking you to do. Make sure you're clear on what they're asking, because if they're not being clear, they're being deceptive, they're being manipulative, then that's much harder to do if you're repeating their own words back and saying, we call it a technique called developed discrepancy, which is say, so on the one hand, what you want from me is this, but on the other hand, you've asked me to do this in this way. Help me understand, what is it you actually would like me to do? And I think that gives you a platform of assertion that is not you having a go at them and saying, you're never clear, you say one thing and then you say the opposite. That's not effective to come at that from criticism. It's also not effective to just acquiesce. So instead, what we would say is seek that clarification. And if they can't give it, you're going to become a difficult target.
I think maybe, I mean, to give a sort of concrete example, just from, I mean, and I'm not suggesting I'm not in a massively privileged situation, but I'm just trying to think of a recent example where I felt completely out of control and powerless, was when I was stopped at the beach by a police officer. And at the end of the day, I mean, without going into the details of it, it was pretty bad experience, if I'm honest. And my natural inclination was to resist this aggressive affront to my autonomy. And, it's a pretty hostile, controlling event, really. And my natural inclination was to bite back. And actually, I think, God, if I was in my teens, I'd be up for it. And I get that. I understand that. And I thought, my God, if I was a teenager or as a black lad, and I was experiencing this daily, I would have a real problem with it. And I was treated not well. But I managed, mainly because Emily and my son sort of nudged me in a sort of direction that was the right direction, to just back down. And I might not have liked it. And I really didn't like it. And, even thinking about it now makes me feel angry. But it did work for me in the sense that I didn't end up hogtied on the floor with handcuffs on. So it depends what your goal is in part, and whether you live to fight another day. And, that it's a difficult experience if you're on the receiving end of permanently feeling out of control. I guess what I'd say, the long game is worth it. And we've been in this for a long time. We certainly haven't come from privileged positions, either of us. So just stick in there, stick with it, recognize and forgive yourself for the occasional mess ups that you're going to make, biting back, because it's going to happen. It's a natural reaction to bite back at an authority figure that's trying to control you. But the long game is worth it, is worth sticking in there. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does. There's a couple of others that I might also draw on. A lot of this is about emotional control, right? Are you handling yours and others as best you can?
Yeah.
Somebody mentions a quick question. What is the best, or what if I get emotional during a difficult discussion or interaction with someone? What are the best ways of controlling emotions so that I regain control and head to a more healthy place in this discussion?
Great question. And so often a problem when we're in training. We'll expose police officers to horrendous, actors that are playing horrendous people, but it feels a real affront. So there are techniques that you can use.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most fundamental is that when there's a tipping point, isn't there, where you can recognize in your head, I'm becoming quite distressed or upset or emotional about this. Part of it is knowing where your tipping point is. And so that before you get to the point where your emotions are now controlling the conversation instead of your rational brain, let's say, you can actually close that and move away from it until you can calm down. And that's what we would recommend. Even when we're working with police officers, some of the things, if you're sat across from someone who's done something horrendous, a lot of my domestic abuse cases, we've got cruelty to children, cruelty to animals, incredibly triggering behaviors that they're having to discuss with someone and not react. If you become emotional, you are going to lose your ability to communicate. So what we've often said is, it doesn't matter, you need to take a break. So say, we're going to take a break there, maintain the professionalism and move away. Now, if you're in a natural conversation, you just say, I'm getting a bit distressed. What I teach kids and teenagers that we're working with is to even say to mom and dad, I'm getting upset. I can feel myself getting upset. I need a break. Can we talk about this in half an hour? I need to go calm down. And then we teach them how to go calm down and then come back to the conversation. Now, I have to say to you, as a parent who's taught their child this, and he's used this on me since he was about 7, when you have to say, okay, that's fine, we'll talk in half an hour, and turn around and walk off, that's very difficult. So sometimes the challenge is the other person doesn't want to let you leave, but you have to hold your ground and say, this is not going to be a discussion. It's going to just be an argument or a load of emotion.
And then it's so much more difficult to recover. If you've put that drop of ink in the glass of water, it's difficult to get back out again. So stopping it is one option. I think the other option is always asking, you know, Mr. Spocket, which is, why is this person behaving in this way? Not this person is being really angry towards me. I don't like it. That's making me angry. And then we're off. So your go-to line should be, this person's angry. Why are they angry? Try and objectify it. You know, that can be a stopping. And then I think the other thing is a distraction technique. Just put your head somewhere else with a mantra. We had one cop that was a very good interviewer, actually, but he had certain things that triggered him. He said, what am I going to do when I'm in that moment? I can't, it's difficult for me to keep extracting myself. I said, just have a safe word, whatever it is. And he just said his son's name. So when he was on the receiving end of this, you know, horrendous abuse, he just repeated his son's name for a while to distract him. And then just calm down. So
another question that's come through is, again, in addition to the kind of emotional control, a lot of your principles in the book seem to relate to a kind of a mutual respect that develops, right? And respecting the autonomy, empathizing with the other person, right? That's all well and good with most of the spectrum of the people we interact with on a daily basis, you'd imagine, right? But one of the questions came through, am I supposed to respect the autonomy of an abuser? You know, how do I look at the goals of a prolific offender? I don't respect his goals or her goals, right? I don't respect the dangerous offender who's got a string of convictions or has been involved in abusive behavior towards a whole string of different people. His goals are wrong. I don't want to respect his goals, right? We need to change his behavior, right? So where does that fit into your model?
So this is 100%, you know, my daily existence.
Right.
The individuals that I'm working with have committed horrendous acts of abuse or violence against the people they're supposed to love the most. I do not share their core values. And so it's not about respecting their goals, but so it's not about respect. It's about understanding them. Okay. So if you want to stop that behavior and you want to stop the harm that they are causing, then you do have to seek understanding. And in the domestic abuse sector, I do a lot of work with professionals around how they engage with perpetrators of abuse, and that it is not constructive to have a retribution-based relationship with someone you're trying to help change. Shame, judgment, these things don't help people change. You know, think about anybody who's tried to diet or stop smoking or whatever. If someone shames you and judges you and belittles you, does it help you with your goal? Not at all. So part of it is, as difficult as that is, wanting to seek understanding. And like Laurence is saying, that does not mean collusion. I can still hold my principles of, I do not accept or agree or respect what you've chosen to do, but I understand it. I get your journey. And if you're not prepared to do that, I do feel like, you know, that is a measure of you not being prepared to put yourself in that position to allow that person to change. And that's very limiting. You know, I think it then means that we're being guided by a closed door. You know, we're not prepared to try to understand that other person.
That's fascinating, Emily. Thank you so much for that. I've got one or two other questions to look at as well. A very nice and quick and easy one. How do you gain rapport with someone who's burying their head in the sand? Nice quick question. How would you answer something like that?
I suppose what you mean by burying your head in the sand. I mean, we get some suspects, I guess, that are extremely quiet. And I mean, we haven't touched on this, have we? The wheel. We've touched on the here principles, but the other thing that we talk about is the archetypes or animal behaviors, where we're talking about controlling behavior, cooperative behavior, capitulating behavior, and conflict. And just very briefly, let's talk about those four animals. So lion is about leading and being dominant. Monkey is about being warm and friendly. Capitulating is mouse, which is being lower and listening. And T-Rex is about having conflict. Now, you need to master all these four interpersonal ways of behaving. And when they are turned up, the extreme versions of them become problematic. So I guess what the questioner is asking is, how do you deal with someone that is very low mouse, which is someone very low on submission and is being avoidant? I guess that's what the question relates to. the common mistake there is actually to go monkey, to be very warm and friendly towards them. But actually, certainly within a suspect interviewing context, you can be appropriately charged lion. You can be quite robust. You can be taking a leadership role and a bit more, I think we've got to be careful with this word, but paternalistic towards the person, as long as it's not patronizingly paternalistic, and just straightforward and dealing with that problem head on. I mean, it's because we're talking about a metaphor here, I'm not entirely sure what the context is that the person's talking about. But if it's someone that's very quiet, you can be in that more controlling position. You can be more forthright. You need to be gentle with it and use the here principles as well. Have you got anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about this, and obviously, like, burying their head in the sand could be any number of things. But if it's like we've got a financial problem that they don't want to discuss, or it could be we've got to move them into a nursing home because they can't live at home independently anymore, but they don't want to have that conversation. How do we broach a subject that they want to avoid? And part of that is to name the avoidance. And that's the difficulty, which is to say, I can tell every time I bring this up, you don't want to talk about it. Tell me about, and then explore the avoidance. Don't just go straight into why we have to talk about it is, because that's your agenda. Go into why does it make you feel like you want to avoid it? And then listen to what you get back, because you need to explore that avoidance and resistance. Why are they burying their head in the sand? Why don't they want to talk about it? Try and understand. There might be a whole raft of reasons for that. And you can't start that conversation until you overcome that resistance.
I mean, and then the other thing there is, that when you lay that on the line, provide a lot of space. Because if that person really is thinking about it, the temptation is to just keep filling the space with more what we'd call conversational tags on the end of it, which is, tell me why this is difficult for you. Space. What's the problem here? Not enough space. And keep adding. So just leave it and allow them to process, because that might be a hard place for them to go to, and they're going to need. I mean, there's some research that indicates that in suspect interviews, the pause length is 7 seconds. Well, that's not enough for those big, overwhelming questions that might be life-changing moments. And the same thing might be true here. Right. We've got these financial difficulties, but every time I bring it up, it seems to be difficult for you.
Right. That's a great answer. Thank you so much.
Leave your space.
The flip side, I've got a completely contrasting example. Another question. It's all very well, this person suggesting, I'd like to use empathy and respect, etc. But what if the person I'm interacting with has no respect for me? What if this person doesn't return any of those behaviors to me? How do I deal with someone who it's not what did he say exactly? It was a really, really well put.
My simple answer to that is
not being emotional, trying to show empathy, but if someone shouts back and does not return the respect, what do you do?
Simple answer, nothing. You can't control someone else's behavior, you can only control you. But as soon as you are allowing them to control you, they are out of control of themselves, and so are you. And if we're talking about anger or aggression or a lack of respect, faster rise, faster fall. The more you try and grapple it and ride that tiger, the longer you're going to be on the tiger. So the basic answer is you can't. You've got to let it abate, and you've got to stand back, and you've got to listen. You've got to maintain the line.
The analogy we sometimes use with the officers we're training is, I'll say, be the rock, not the palm tree. So, and what I mean by that, my ridiculous analogies, what I mean by that is, if the other person is shouting and railing against you and insulting you and being sarcastic or raising their voice, don't match them. Don't be led by their communication style. Hold your ground and stay committed to the positive responses that you're having in the face of that. Don't bend and acquiesce, which is the palm tree. Just let it wash over you. And we sometimes talk about this with, like, if your teenager is giving you a mouthful of autonomy and sarcasm and whatever else, if you match it or if you try and control it, then it's only going to go one way. And guess who just controlled that interaction? They did, not you. So why don't react? They're a teenager. That's part of what that response is about. Hold your ground, hold your calm, your inner calm zenness, and ride it out.
I mean, we have a wonderful scenario for our police officers where they're dealing with a character, and any of the cops that are listening to this will shudder at the name David Copeland, because it's one of our characters that we put in there. He's so obnoxious when he comes into the interview room. He's literally stands up and says, "You've got 30 seconds to tell me why I'm here, and if you can't tell me in 30 seconds, you'll be looking at the back of my lots of swearing head." And then it's, "I want a phone call. I want a phone call, phone call, phone call, phone call." And the cops that rise to that, it goes on forever. We can go for the whole day having an argument about it. But those cops, and we've got some amazing cops that are good at being the mouse. And the mouse sounds like the least powerful position, but actually it is the most powerful. That ability to retain self-control, sit back, and as Emily says, be the rock, listen, have the humility and patience to let that person go on for as long as they want, and to try and think about what is going on in their head. They will win more quickly. You're not going to win instantly, and it may take some time, but as soon as you bite back, you're just fanning the flames and chucking more gas on the fire.
Right. We're going to have to start thinking about wrapping this up. I mean, it's been a fascinating discussion, and I'm very, very, very thankful that we've had the chance to have this discussion. But thinking about how we end, we've gone through some pretty heavy-duty things, right? Intimate partner abuse, terrorism, crime, investigations, extreme contexts, etc. That's all in the book. There's plenty of other things in there too, right? And I'm trying to ask you to think if there's anything we can draw out. People are struggling at the moment, right? The lockdown, they're fearful, they're worried. Many people have been through tragedy. Many people have lost all kinds of different things, lost their work, lost loved ones, facing up to new forms of anxiety, uncertainty in their relationships and their everyday conduct. It's all been thrown into confusion, right? We're in a difficult time, many of us. And I wonder if there's anything more kind of progressive and upbeat, more kind of for kind of more ordinary life type scenarios. I mean, you've mentioned parenting and mentioned work here and there. If there's anything we can reflect on that might be slightly more optimistic, kind of a learning thing that we can take from your work, that we can think about. It's a weekend. We want to relax. We want to think of something nice. What could we do from a more optimistic and progressive takeaway from your work?
That's not a tall order at all.
Well, look, I think the first thing is to acknowledge the reality of what we've been through. Yeah, everyone's had a tough time. Some people have had a much tougher time than other people. So there's a kind of dishonesty to say it's all going to be okay. You know, we all need to be okay with the fact that and can all admit that we've suffered. Yeah. And each in, our own individual ways, everyone's had a tough time here. So it's sort of disingenuous. And I, like you say, Leah, we don't want to kind of end on a downer. But the reality is, let's accept it's tough, and let's accept it's been painful, and let's be prepared to talk about it. I mean, I know it sounds like a cheesy thing, but one of the key things is what we're good at as human beings when we get it right is talking. I've had many conversations recently with people that have had bereavements, difficult times. Be there for them. And make sure you've got people there for you. And if you haven't, then reach out. And like I say, I know that sounds cheesy, reaching out, but talking and being listened to. We talk about this in chapter 2 of the book. The thing that is underrated as a capacity for human beings, but is so important to them, is social connection. Right. Drinking, smoking, lack of exercise. But you know what? If you are lonely, that is the thing that will kill you quicker than drinking or smoking. So let's acknowledge and be realistic about the fact that is important. And step up where you can. We've had in this pandemic people that have stepped back. We've had people that have been inert. But be the people that step up, be the people that reach out, be the people that talk to one another. It's important for our mental health, but it's also really important for our physiological health. There's plenty of studies that look at the people where you've got a proliferation of millennials, people that have got to 100 years old. Do you know the common denominator? Respect for each other and respect for social connection. That's what keeps you alive. So important. So let's not underestimate this as an important skill. Let's not keep calling it a soft skill. It's a thing that is hard to learn. Let's not underrate the value of being able to talk to one another. It's extremely important. And it's effortful. It's not, amusingly, we saw on the promo for this instant rapport. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. It's tough. and you're going to screw it up and you're going to mess it up and you're going to get it wrong. And we do all the time. We teach this, we research it, and not uncommonly we'll mess up with our child, we'll mess up with our parents, we'll mess up with our siblings, we'll mess up with our boss, right? It's effortful, it's hard work, but persistence pays off. If you can get it more often right than wrong, you'll be all right in the long run. Whatever sort of situation you are in, you will ameliorate and improve your situation if you can stick a little bit of effort into this idea of reaching out to people and trying to be basically a decent human being, listen to other people and try and seek understanding. It's what human beings are designed to do when they get it right.
Wonderful. Emily, have you got any final last reflections?
I mean, my last thing would be, and again, I don't want to sound like a bumper sticker, but I often sort of reflect on the pandemic and what's happened to all of us as a society and think this is a massive global perspective slap. Some of the patterns, some of the habits we've got into were so unconstructive, were so damaging anyway. And this, all the horrors that this has brought, it has also brought people to recognize perspective and think, what do I really care about? What do I really value? And am I putting that at the front of my effort? Am I putting that at the front of what I prioritize? And so for me, it's hold on to those things that this whole experience has taught us and put your effort where it's actually deserved. And don't get drawn into someone else's goals or cycle. Hold on to, your own core values and what you want. And I do feel like this has given us globally a moment to reflect on that.
And I think, it's been a great divider. You start to understand the people that really do step up. And, as you said at the beginning, I work in critical incidents. When you're going through a critical incident, and all of us have been in some ways, it's a great perspective taker on the, understanding the people that step up and step back. So even if it's having the clarity of realizing, do you know what? I'm quite surprised these people in my life have stepped back. Maybe I don't want much to do with them anymore. And that sounds like a sort of terrible thing to say, but you need to know that, people that aren't helping you along in life, it's not a problem with having that realization, if that's the truth of it. But equally, I'm sure many of us have thought, God, I've never realized this person was that good a person. They've really stepped forward, and that's the relationship I'm going to invest in.
Okay. Laurence and Emily, thank you so much for a fascinating hour's discussion. So much to reflect on in there. And I guess for me, one of the things that I thought was most fascinating was the way it reaffirms that approach towards empathy, compassion, and mutual respect. It's just so important, and there's often so little of it about. And your work is an important contribution to a much more progressive and optimistic understanding of how people can relate to one another. So thank you so much for your work, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Leo. Thank you for
it's an absolute pleasure.
Great host. It's great.
A few things to end on. If you'd like to purchase a copy of Emily Lawrence's book, Rapport, The 4 Ways to Read People, it'd be available from the partner bookseller Fox Lane Books. Thank you all for joining us today. The recording's available on the York Ideas YouTube channel after the festival ends, which you can find very easily through just searching it on Google. You'll be contacted via email when the video is available to view. If you enjoyed this event, you may also be interested in the Rag and Bone Shop, How We Make Memories, Monday the 14th of June at 1 p.m. Find out more at yorkfestivalideas.com. Check out the website, full details of all the events. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these events and continue the conversation using the hashtag York Ideas. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. Hope there's a lot of things to take away from that session. Thanks for the audience for all the questions. I handled as many of them as I could. There was a lot coming in, so if I didn't get to yours, I'm sorry, but I did as many as I thought I could. That's it. Have a look at Laurence and Emily's book. I thank them both one last time, and have a great weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye now. All the best.
Bye-bye.